First Class Fatherhood. That is where Alec Lace comes in with his popular podcast.
And one of the most interesting was on a podcast.
Alec Lace interviews high-profile fathers from actors to NFL players with a vision to change the narrative of fatherhood and family life.
Joining me now, First Class Father Dave Rubin. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
I'm glad to be with you. Hopefully talk about something a little bit different than my wheelhouse political stuff that I'm usually putting out there.
Well, let's jump into it. How many kids do you have? How old are they?
I have 2 kids, and believe it or not, they are 4 months and 2 months, which I guess makes them like super accelerated Irish twins of sorts, something like that. But they are downstairs right now. Justin, who's the older one, he is napping. Luke just got up. I think he's having a bottle, and I'm just trying to get some sleep when I can, and it's been pretty good so far.
Yeah, we have 4 kids ourselves. Our first 2 we consider Irish twins. They're just about 15 months apart. So you're closer to the twin zone than the Irish twin zone over there for sure.
Right, exactly. Well, it's kind of funny, and a lot of people have been telling us this, especially parents of twins, to have this odd, 4 month and 2 month situation. And I'm happy to get into how all that happened with 2 surrogates and everything else. When they live their lives for the rest of their lives, in essence, they'll be twins because the age is so close, and they'll grow up with the same things, obviously, and all that kind of stuff. And they're going to share a room and all that. But right now, at that very early age, it's like there's a massive difference between 2 months and 4 months. 2 months, it's still like you're waking them up to feed them and all that kind of stuff. 4 months, Justin's kind of getting on his own, but Luke is still really in that infant phase. He was also born a little bit early, so taking him a little bit longer to kind of catch up. But it's been really nice. It's been a learning curve on every single front, which everyone tells you and warns you about. But you can't really understand it till you go through it.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And if you could, Dave, please just take a second here to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. So, work-wise, I'm the host of the Rubin Report, which sort of got put on the map, I'd say about 7-8 years ago, because I started doing long-form interviews, which it's kind of funny. Now everybody's doing long-form interviews. But at the time, that's when Snapchat was hot. You may remember Vine, those little 6-second videos. Everything was getting shorter and shorter. It was when Twitter was still somewhat new and fresh. Things were getting condensed and tiny and small. And I felt like everything was making everybody kind of stupid, to be quite honest. I felt that there was no room for interesting, honest conversation and really to explore an idea and that sort of thing. So I started doing my show as a long-form, old-school, Larry King-esque interview show. And people really gravitated to it. And, now, of course, everybody and their brother is doing it in one form or another. And I think there's more podcasts than people at this point. But by bringing that back, I had a little something to do, I suppose, with kind of where we're at culturally right now, which is that people are trying to make sense of the madness. Even just looking behind you, some of the guests that you've had on the show, and it's like, these people, whether they're actors or MMA guys or comedians or whatever, people are trying to make some sense. And it has become increasingly difficult to make sense of things when you have a hyper-controlled corporate media, which we do. Now you have crazy big tech censorship, which we're only beginning to, shine the spotlight on at the moment. And just the general state of the modern world that leaves people kind of crazy. So that's what I started doing. Now I'm mostly known for, I do my daily show where I yammer at the camera about politics and culture and everything else, and hopefully do it with a little bit of humor. And, it's designed specifically not to make people crazy, and kind of with the tenor that we're talking about things right now. And it seems to be working, I suppose.
Yeah, and obviously you've had tremendous success. But Dave, just like you were saying there, you're absolutely right, especially when I bring a lot of the NFL guys, a lot of the NFL dads on the show that have started their own podcasts now. They feel like, after a game, they only get like the same 1 or 2 questions post-game interview. And it's like you can never really delve into more than just that surface answer that they always give. And everyone seems to have the same kind of answer to these questions. Now with this long-form type stuff, podcast, they can host their own. They can really, dive into what's going on in them emotionally, personally, and so much more. So I love the platforms that you guys all help create. I mean, I'm a railroad mechanic myself. I've been doing that for 23 years, started this up as a sideline a few years ago, and I've been blessed to have so many guys come on just like yourself here and talk about fatherhood. So let's dive into that if we could here. So you have the 2 kids now, 4 months, 2 months. You guys went the surrogacy route. What was the decision making there for you guys to choose surrogacy over adoption, and how has becoming a dad so far changed your perspective on life?
Sure. So for people that have no clue whatsoever, so I happen to be married to a guy. That's the way I always describe it to people. I don't think, I hate the phrase LGBT community. These are letters that have virtually nothing to do with each other. I believe that every adult human being should be allowed to enter whatever relationship makes them feel fulfilled and happy and everything else. So David, who's my husband, his name happens to be David too, which is also hilarious for people. We've been together for something like 13 years at this point. We've been married for about 7 years, monogamous, happy, functional, decent. I never really wanted kids. I'm 46 years old, so I grew up in the 80s, where first off, I was very confused about my sexuality for a long time, but also there was no such thing as gay marriage. The only gay person that you might have seen on television was an over-the-top, ridiculous caricature of a gay person, sort of Paul Lynde from the Hollywood Squares, or just some, very, very hyper stereotypical, Queenie, Dancy, whatever. And I never felt that way. So anyway, that caused a lot of tumult and closeted nonsense with me for a long time. When I finally met somebody and fell in love, he's a little bit younger than me. He grew up in a time when it was sort of going to be obvious that he would be able to get married and have a family and all of those things. But we were trying to piece that together. And then I happened to be on tour with Jordan Peterson, who I'm sure you're familiar with and your listeners are familiar with. We were on tour for about a year and a half. And one of the things that Jordan kept saying over and over again on the tour was that for most people, almost everybody, to live a fully actualized life, you have to experience becoming a parent. And then perhaps a grandparent after that, maybe a great-grandparent after that. But the idea of bringing a child into this world, rearing that child, teaching that child things, that whole experience, it's so fundamental to what it is to be human that almost everyone has to have it. He did say there are some exceptions. You might find an artist who is so find such meaning and value in their art that they can live the best life possible. And that's not to say that there aren't plenty of good people who don't have kids. Of course there are, and people have all sorts of circumstances that don't allow it and everything else. In essence, though, I have never thought I was going to have kids. I'm on tour with the leading intellectual thinker of our time, talking about the importance of having kids. And then we're literally traveling the world, but I've got David back home texting me every day about how he wants to start a family. So those things the confluence of those things sort of brought us here. And then to specifically answer your question, then we had to figure out how do you do it? Because it ain't as easy when you don't have at least one chick involved. And we really decided that the biological part was important to us, at least at some level. So we didn't want to necessarily adopt. We did talk about it for a little bit. And then as we went along the surrogacy process, there were a couple miscarriages and some other complications, and also COVID, which delayed a lot of things. So the adoption conversation was kind of always there, but we really wanted to push this route forward. So in essence, what we did, and this is where it gets a little kind of sci-fi, like how do you have kids in the future? So we got an egg donor, and as you know, when you get an egg donor, the women hopefully are going to provide you with many eggs. And then we took my sperm, we took David's sperm, and we inseminated 2 eggs, and they turned out to be healthy and happy and good, and here we are. So, but one other little just interesting point, because everyone says, well, why do you do 2 months apart? Makes no sense. It's like, why didn't you either do twins, real twins, or give yourself a little time to breathe? What happened was, because as I mentioned, with all the delays of COVID and then a few miscarriages and such, when the first one took, and we really knew, we were like 3 months in, and we knew, you're basically good to go at this point, 2 months in essence, we basically were like, listen, we got to keep moving. I'm 46. And if we get stuck with a few more miscarriages or COVID-2 or whatever could happen in the world, we don't want this to be delayed another 5 years. And then, of course, the second one took immediately, thus 4 months and 2 months downstairs.
Well, it's awesome. And I know that I had David Burka on the show a while back. He's married to Neil Patrick Harris, and they didn't know whose a sperm was for each. They didn't know which kid basically was there from them. Is that how it is with you guys, or do you know which one is which, or are they both one of yours?
We do know. We have not told anybody. I think it'll present itself. We sort of thought it would be fun if it just kind of presents itself to the grandparents, whether it's a smile or a laugh or a mannerism or whatever it might be. They do kind of look similar. So we'll see if that presents itself. But you know this as a father. I mean, ultimately, it just does not matter. These kids are equally both of ours. We love them equally. And, I think it'll present itself one day. One day I'll be there, and one of these kids, I'm not saying which, is going to look at me and say something sarcastic back to me, and I'm going to go, that's the one that's from me, And but that won't be more important, obviously, than whatever goes on with the other one.
Of course, yeah. And like I said, we have 4 of them, and the 4 of them couldn't be more different than one another. It's amazing. Sometimes we're like, man, I can't believe you guys all come from the same place, because they all have their own personalities, interests, and although they have, we can definitely see where they come from with certain things. So it's so cool to watch as they start going through the process. But I know that you did receive a lot of blowback when you guys decided to do this, and from your own community, where it seems like had to be difficult to kind of navigate that while you were going through such an important part and a big part of your life. How did you kind of get through those? Walk me through some of those emotions, or how you dealt with kind of some of the criticism that was coming your way during the process.
Sure. First off, I'm glad you're asking, because I think I've only addressed this on one other show for a few minutes. So I'm happy to do it. So basically, we made the announcement. We took a picture in the studio with little placards with the dates and saying 2 kids are coming. And then suddenly the internet freaking blew up. I'm talking, it was trending, all this stuff. And what I can tell you truly, 99% of what I saw was positive and love. I'm talking about from my fans, from the emails, the tweets, the Facebook messages, all of that stuff, from all of the colleagues and people on my show that I'm associated with that either publicly or privately sent lovely notes and said nice things and all of that stuff. But what also came with that was a couple people, not that I'm associated with. There were only, as far as I knew and know, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you saw something that I didn't see, there were 2 people with blue checks on Twitter who really went after me. One of them was this woman, Jenna Ellis, who I had on the show once. She was a Trump lawyer. The other guy, this guy, Mark Dice, who I've never had on the show or been on his show. I've had no association with this guy whatsoever. They were really going off about surrogacy and gay parenting and whatever. And then the trolls get involved, and just a bunch of people that say mean things. It's just part of the internet. It's part of human reality in a modern world, something like that. So I did not think it was a big deal. Because it's just how it is. What I didn't like about it was Forbes wrote an article about how Dave Rubin's audience turns on him. And they used a picture of me and Candace Owens. Candace had been at my house 2 or 3 days before we made the announcement, helping us pick out strollers with her husband. Nobody that I'm friends with or associated with turned on me whatsoever. I did have some fans that had interesting questions related to surrogacy and talking about the role of the mother and the importance of a female role model, which, by the way, are legitimate issues. And I've subsequently done a 2-hour interview with Jordan Peterson about just that, and I'm happy to discuss that with you if you want. But I never saw my own audience never turned on me. I mean, I went on a book tour right after that. We sold out every show for 2 months. My show has had the best numbers every month since then for the last 6 months or so. But to your point, I did see it. Yes, when I was opening Twitter, I saw a bunch of virtually all anonymous frog people saying horrible things about gay people, about surrogacy, and the rest of it. And it just kind of goes with the territory. It just does. It is what it is, and you just kind of let it be.
And it's such a shame, too, because with so many children being aborted in this country and so many families being broken and everything else, to see a family that is just beginning, just starting and creating new life, it's always a thing to celebrate, in my opinion anyway. And so I focus a lot, Dave, on this show about the fatherless crisis that we have going on in our country, where so many kids are growing up without that father or father figure in their life. In my opinion, it's the number one social issue we have going on in our country. And if we could just get, maybe dads back in the home, so many of these issues would start to go away pretty quickly here. And I know now on your side, yeah, as you mentioned there too, without having a mom in the home also creates some challenges. So what was the thought process there? Is there going to be designated mother figures that you have that are going to be in your kids' lives as well?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's an important question. And I think it's a question that a lot of people are afraid to ask, right? Because there's an implicit like, oh, are you not okay with gays by asking that question? And that's just not right, because, I've discussed this with Jordan Peterson. I've discussed this privately and publicly with Dennis Prager, who's a friend and mentor of mine. The idea of the family structure of a mother and a father and children beneath that, then extended family out this way and grandparents, going out that way. It is the basis for what everything is built on. So when you say to me that the fatherless crisis is basically the biggest issue, that so many of these other things that we're always worrying about would go away because if we could solve the fatherless issue, you're right. Of course you're right. A solid family structure is the most important thing, period. It's not going to be perfect, and nobody watching this, nor you or I, came from the perfect situation, right? My parents have been married. They just celebrated their 50th anniversary, actually, have 3 kids. Now, 2 of their kids have 3 kids. 1 of their kids have 2 kids. They've got a good extended family, but it wasn't perfect. They had their own struggles. We had family struggles, whatever it might be, but we basically got it right. So the structure of reality related to my family is pretty decent for whatever little tensions we have and personal stuff. So when it comes to differing from that, so if you're going to say, okay, if you acknowledge that the family unit's the most important thing, well, now can the family unit look a little bit different and still be okay? My answer to that is absolutely yes. So look, we've got 2 fathers here. Now I can tell you, David, who's downstairs right now, we have someone that helps us at night, but we start the day at about 7 a.m. I get the babies, I hang out with them for the first hour, and I'm doing feedings and all that stuff. And then I'm doing my thing during the day, right? I'm in studio, I'm doing shows like this. David has taken on, we have no help during the day from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. He is doing everything with 2 babies, and there is so much love around these kids. Now we have, my sister lives in Miami. She just had a baby in between our 2 babies, her 3rd, so she's here. So we have her here. David's sister has been staying with us and helping out, so she's here. We have 2 grandmothers here. I don't want to get too lost in why the biology of it's important, but men and women are different, and there's the hunter-gatherer situation and the homestead situation, and I think you can provide most, if not all, of those things. But that doesn't dismiss the fact that we're going to have complex conversations with them probably a little bit earlier on than we might have had to otherwise. When one day, when these kids are maybe 7 years old, and they say, well, at school, there's a dad and a mom for most, but it's a little different here, and we're going to have to explain that. But I think the best thing that you can do, and I hope I can do this okay, and only time will tell, is that if I am a decent person and David is a decent person, and we bring them up in a home that feels loving and safe and decent, we'll put them out in the world with the tools needed to thrive. So in no way am I dismissing the importance of the family or the importance of the mother. I think there's all sorts of ways that you can take the ideal situation, which is the sort of mother, father, kids home, and have side versions of it that are pretty damn good, and sometimes better, because as you know, you could have a mother and a father and 3 kids, and you could have an alcoholic father and a mother with bipolar disorder, or they could have financial struggles, this, that, the other thing. There could be abuse and all that. So no one is doing it in the perfect way, but I think you want to get as close to that. You want to emulate that as much as possible.
You do, and well said. And just to make myself clear, just because there is a dad in the home doesn't necessarily mean that is a good dad that's in the home. So it's not like that solves all the things right there. So it's more important that there's love in the home, and that's the most important thing, that a child does grow up with that love, knowing that they're loved, particularly by a male figure and by a female figure. And sometimes I have a lot of dads that grew up without a father of their own, and some of them found that dad in the military. Some guys find it through a coach, but it's the guys that are finding it in the street is why we're filling up the prison systems in this country with fatherless kids. And I think that's really to the point that I try to stress on the show here.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You may be aware, I'm good friends with Larry Elder, and I've had him on the show many times. And this is what Larry has been talking about for literally 40 years. I mean, in essence, since the welfare state really exploded, mostly within the Black community, and kept this sort of intergenerational poverty, and then, incentivized women to have more kids and all of those things. Before, I might be off by a year or two, but I think before around 1973, when the welfare state really kicked in, Black people had higher rates of a two-parent home than white people, meaning the divorce rates and the separation rates were less. Then you start bringing in all of this government nonsense, and you can see what the results of that are.
Yeah, we've tripled. Just obviously, the African American community has been hit the hardest. But if you look in the 1950s, we were at 9% of families that didn't have a father in the home, that were mostly all nuclear strong families. And now today we're at 26, 27%. It's tripled, and we lead the world in single parent homes, and majority of those are single mom homes. So it's definitely an epidemic, I would say, in this country. But then
I can also just tell you one other thing related to that, because I mentioned Jordan Peterson a couple of times. When I was on tour with him, and Jordan, who his whole thing in 12 Rules for Life was about taking responsibility for your life, people kept saying, his audience is so male dominated. Now, I actually never found that. I usually found that the audience was about 60-40, something like that. So it wasn't as skewed as you might have thought. But so many of the guys that were there were guys, I would say, in their early to mid 20s into their early 30s, who had some situation that's kind of what you're describing. They either had an absentee father or no father at all, or an abusive father, or something else. And then they were looking for leadership and guidance and decency somewhere else, and they were finding it through Jordan. So that was also an extraordinary thing to be part of on that front.
Yeah, and there's so many great men that are out there doing it like Jordan is. The young guys need that message. Like, I've had Jocko Willink here on the podcast. Yeah. He's another one that's out there really helping a lot of guys find their way when it comes to this stuff. So it's very important to our society. And I wish it would get, highlighted more than so much of the noise and the nonsense that we hear every day. But bringing it back into you as a father here, what would you consider, Dave, to be the top values that you're hoping to instill in your kids growing up?
I mean, truth more than anything else. I just hope that I can say something that is truthful to them and show them why truth is important. The thing is, this, when you have little kids, I'm talking like the toddler age that I have now, that is a freaking blank slate. That you can see the world and the future and the past in their eyes. You really can. It's like they're a human, organic being right in front of you, and what they're gonna learn is the stuff that you're gonna teach them, but it's not just the stuff you're gonna teach them because you say it to them. They're gonna learn by your actions. And I think that we will do our best to teach them that truth matters, that reality matters, that decency matters, that you can be a good person in a world that is often very cold, to have some honor. I think even I play basketball, so I'm looking forward to teaching them basketball and playing basketball with a certain degree of honor and passion and all of those things. But I think more than anything else, just what I wouldn't want, and I'm here in Florida where, we had this big craziness about the quote unquote don't say gay bill, even though the word gay wasn't in there, and all it had to do with was parental rights in education, meaning that you wouldn't want state educators talking to your kids about sex or gender privately and hiding it from you, regardless of gay or straight or anything else. I wouldn't want anyone else coming in and confusing my child about anything. So I'm very aware of that when I'm with them, because, I do this for a living where I talk about all these cultural issues, and you see drag queen story hour, you hear about all the nonsensical woke neo-racism in the schools, all of this stuff. And you go, when you look at a kid who's just perfect and a sponge for everything, and you go, man, I'm going to put them into a world that is filled with nonsense. You better be able to have them turn back to you and go, where is zero? Where is truth? So I'm going to do my best with that. I think that's it.
And because of things like this, I've had conversations with my kids at ages where I couldn't even imagine my parents talking to me about this kind of stuff with. But because it's so much out there right now, you have to get ahead of it and talk to your kids about what's going on, what they're seeing. I just had Kirk Cameron on the podcast here, and Kirk. He's a guy that they wouldn't allow him to have the story hour, yet they bring in the drag queen. I'm here in New Jersey, where 2 years ago they passed anal sex as part of the teaching curriculum for 8th graders. And then now it's still going back and forth where they want to teach the gender identity stuff to kindergarten, 1st and 2nd graders. So it's kind of really wild to see the changes that have really taken place here, and how it forces parents to kind of have these conversations with their kids at a far earlier age.
Oh, way earlier. I can only imagine where I'm going to be at in 6 years or 8 years when these issues start coming up, or when they come home from school and ask me something or whatever. But one of the things that's been really nice that I've learned over the last couple months is that because I'm out there always screaming about politics and telling people what I think. It's one thing to do that as a either a single person, or you could be in a relationship, but without kids, not being a father. You can always just talk about the issues, and sometimes in an almost impersonal way, right? So the Don't Say Gay thing comes up, and I felt very strongly about not infecting the minds of young people, and why this has nothing to do with state educators, or why that's not the right of state educators to do, et cetera, et cetera. But now that I have a kid, now that I have 2 kids, it's like the idea that I would want them infected with the ideas, or you could relate that to COVID also. Just in the last couple of days, Fauci's out there talking about how kids at 6 months should get vaccinated, and sorry, brother, it's not going to happen on my watch.
No, that whole thing has been crazy. And I just had, because I had Dr. Malone on the podcast back in August, and he just came back to Twitter yesterday. And an hour after Elon brought him back to Twitter, I get an email from YouTube that they pulled down my interview with Dr. Malone, but it had been up since August. So it was really weird how that kind of
Unbelievable.
Well,
his name's getting out there again. They don't want people Googling him.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I'm curious too here, Dave, because you guys you haven't had to come through this yet, but the discipline portion of it is something that you and your husband, or you and your partner in life have to be on board with what kind of discipline styles you have, because you may come from a different upbringing than your spouse did, and you guys look at it in different ways. So what kind of disciplinarian were your parents with you growing up, and is that different than your husband's upbringing? And have you guys talked about the way that you plan on disciplining your kids?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we haven't had to deal with that yet at 4 months and 2 months. But, I was a pretty easygoing kid. I wasn't getting into trouble in high school. I was playing video games and playing sports. So my parents had a very, very easy time with me. My brother was a great athlete, so he was focused on that. So they didn't have a problem with him. My sister was a little bit more of a rebel. But my parents kind of let us do our thing because we were pretty good. So there really weren't a lot of moments that they had to lay down the hammer. David was definitely more of a partier and kind of out there more and everything else. And I think his parents would kind of give him the leash and then, pull it when necessary. I think the most important thing related to that, and time will bear this out, is that the parents just have to be on the same page. You don't want, I sense one where, I think every parent has this issue. One's a little more strict, one's a little more loose. And then when the kid sees the tension there, they can figure out ways to use that tension. And that's what you don't want. So we'll do our best, I think, to try to be on the same page with these things.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I'm still learning. Our oldest is 16. We're still learning as we go here. It's always an on-the-job training thing. We've never come across some of these issues that we're starting to come across now. And we're looking at each other like, we have to have this kind of conference. So how are we going to deal with this together? So it definitely has to be a united front for sure. And I know this is the first holiday season for you guys as parents here. You guys going to start any traditions? What kind of plans you have here holiday season-wise?
You are a Jersey guy. Use guys. You're definitely a Jersey guy. I love it. Most of my family growing up, I grew up in Long Island, which is just like a slightly alternate Jersey, but most of my family lived in Jersey. We got all our family coming down here. I'm very excited. We were also doing some construction at the house, so we finally got the house in order. I feel like we have a handle on what's going on with the kids. As I said, my sister's down here in Miami, so her family will be here. My brother's bringing his kids down. My parents are going to be down here. And just spend a little time enjoying each other and getting them out. They're all up near you, Northeast, so they're excited to get a little warmth and enjoy that Florida freedom.
Very cool. All right. Well, obviously you've had a massive success here. What are your plans for 2023 as we get ready to turn the page to the new year? What kind of projects you're working on? What can we expect to see from you in the new year?
Well, I just started sketching out the concept for my third book. My last book came out this year. First book came out in 2020. But really what I want to focus on more than anything else is I truly believe, having a lot to do with what is going on with Twitter and Elon Musk, there's an incredible opportunity in America for truth to finally take root again. We've gotten so off the path of truth, censorship, nonsense from the government and from corporate media and big tech. But there's this little glimmer of hope right now that we can start making sense of things. And even just this morning, I was at an event in West Palm Beach where Governor DeSantis was announcing a couple measures that Florida is going to take against the CDC and some of the other organizations that were so draconian in their policies over the last couple of years. And it's like, I think people want truth. They want competency. they want decency. And if we can work on those three, and that's really where I'm going to try to focus my energies, then the political stuff that's making us all crazy all the time won't matter that much. So I would say that, and I'll keep changing diapers and getting some sleep when I can.
Very cool. All right, last thing I want to hit you with here, Dave. I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about-to-be father who's out there listening?
Man, it changes overnight, and no matter you think you know it, and everyone can tell you it, but it changes overnight. So as I just said to my pool guy was here this morning, and he's having a kid in January. I said, listen, man, enjoy the last couple weeks of, just having some tequila in the pool at 2:00 on a Saturday. Yeah, you might be able to get back to it in a couple of years, but you probably don't see it on the horizon, even if you have all the resources in the world. Enjoy what you got, and then I think you can also then understand why people have been doing this for a long freaking time, because there's something really good and decent in there, and it makes you a better person. I don't know that it's for me to say that about myself, but I think you probably know that from talking about all of this with great guests for so long. It's like, it makes you better somehow if you take that opportunity, but you got to seize it. Otherwise, it won't make you better, and then you'll also end up being a pretty bad dad.
Well said. I love the message. It's been an honor for me. I got to say, Dave Rubin, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man.
You have been listening to First Class Fatherhood. First Class Fatherhood is a family-made media podcast. Please visit www.firstclassfatherhood.com or www.familymade.com to find out more details. You can order First Class Fatherhood advice and wisdom from high-profile dads on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Proverbs 22:6 tells us, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will never depart from it. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.